Hello, I'm Abigail, and welcome to my channel about everything having to do with books. For my video this week, I'm going to be doing a book review of my first 5-star book of this year. And since this is my first book review on this channel, I want to set up a couple of things before I begin. First of all, every single review on this channel is going to be spoiler-free, so if you haven't read this book that I'm talking about, you can watch this video without any risk of getting the plot ruined for you. And second of all the books that I'm going to be talking about, including the book today, are ones that aren't really that popular, that I don't really see being talked about a lot or at all on social media. And that's purposeful because I want to kind of show some books that aren't really being talked about a lot and get them the attention they deserve, because the book that I'm talking about today and the books that I'm going to talk about in the future are really good and deserve to be recognized more. So the book that I'm going to be talking about today, like I said, my first 5-star book of the year, and it is Sisters of Sword and Song by Rebecca Ross. I know, don't judge a book by its cover, but the cover is the first thing I want to talk about regarding this book because of how beautiful it is. And I feel like a cover is a great way to draw readers to your book if they are just passing by it in a bookstore, and which is exactly what happened to me. So first up is my overall thoughts on the plot and the pacing of this book. And first I'm going to do a little description of what this book is actually about, and I'll read the description that it has on the inside flap of the book here. And it says, after 8 long years, Evadne will finally be reunited with her older sister Halcyon. While Eva has been tending their family's olive grove, Halcyon has been serving in the Queen's army. But when Halcyon appears a day early, drenched and exhausted, Eva knows something is terribly wrong. Halcyon is on the run, hunted by her commander and charged with a terrible crime. Though Halcyon's life is spared during her trial, the punishment is heavy: 5 years working in the quarry, 5 years imprisoned, and 5 years serving the house she has wronged. Suspicious of the commander and of Halcyon's silence on her crime, Eva volunteers to serve his house in Halcyon's stead. If there's a way to absolve her sister, she'll find it there. And Halcyon begins her own sentence. She quickly learns that there are fates worse than death. So, before I read this book, I knew little to nothing about what it was about. So when I sat down to start reading the book, of course I read the little description on the flap first, and I was immediately intrigued. I don't know about you, but I like books that are kind of a blending of multiple genres, and it sounded like a blending of fantasy and of a little bit of mystery in it, and that's what it is. There's an underlying mystery to the whole plot, and it's eventually solved. You eventually realize what really happened, but that's not for a while. So there's that mystery feel to it, and then there's also fantasy, it's set in a fantasy world, and the world building I felt was good for a standalone novel. If this were to be turned into a series, which I'm pretty sure it won't be, but if it were, I'd want there to be more expansion on the history of the world and some of the mythology and lore in it. And there is a little bit of that, but not as much as there could be for a big series. But for a standalone book, the world building was really, really good. And I thought it was a really interesting world. It's kind of a Greek mythology feel to it. And in fact, at the beginning, in addition to there being an amazing map, which I'll show right here, also a list of some of the gods and goddesses in this fake world. And I always like that at the beginning, because as I'm reading a book and trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is this world like, sometimes I want just a list of everything that's going on. And that was really nice, because there's all these gods and goddesses who are associated with these certain relics, and so it lists right here their names and the relics that they're associated with. So I thought that the world building and just the mix of fantasy and mystery was really, really cool. One of the things that drew me in when I started to read this book. And also the pacing is something that I want to talk about. I thought the pacing was a bit slow at the beginning. There was some kind of unnecessary parts that I feel like could have been cut out. But overall, I thought the pacing was pretty good. Like I said, it was a little slow at the beginning, but once the action really picked up and you really started finding things out, it was well paced. It wasn't too fast where you're like, whoa, what's going on? But it wasn't too slow where you got bored. And because this is a fantasy world, there wasn't like a whole big info dump at the beginning, which I absolutely hate, because you want to kind of be introduced to this world as it goes on. And this book did a really, really nice job of that. So those are my thoughts on the plot and the pacing. So next I want to talk about the characters and the relationship between characters in this book and my thoughts on those. And one of the main things that I particularly enjoyed about reading this book was that the central, core relationship of the novel was one between two sisters. And even though there was a romantic relationship in this book, the main focus was on the two sisters and their bond. And I really enjoyed that, because I find a lot of times in books when there's one specific relationship that's the most important to the book itself, it tends to be a romantic one. And even though there was a romantic relationship in this book that I also really enjoyed, I liked the bond between the sisters that it showed, because I find a lot of times if there's siblings in a book, they either don't have a good relationship or the relationship isn't really talked about. Obviously that's not the case with every book, but in a lot of books I find that it's that way. And as someone who has a sister, I really like to see these two sisters and their bond and their similarities and differences. And talking about the characters themselves, I liked seeing the things that were alike about the two sisters and the things that were different. For example, Halcyon, the older sister, she's in the Queen's Army, so she's super tough. She stands up for what she believes in. She's just overall a really strong fighter. And then there's Avadne, the younger sister, and she has more of a quiet strength to her. She's not as out there as her sister. She's not as tough as her sister, but she is definitely a strong girl. So I liked seeing the similarities and differences, especially when the sisters were working together, because they both had that strength to them, and they both had things that they were really good at and things that they weren't. And so working together, they were like an unstoppable team. And so that was one of my favorite things about this book. Moving on to the romantic relationship that there is in there, I won't say what characters that's between, but the romance in it wasn't as developed as I've seen in some other books, but as I think about it, the book said it's more developed in our Mostly series, and that just makes sense because we have more time to grow with the characters and learn more about them. But for a standalone book, I enjoyed the romance. It wasn't my favorite romance I've ever read, but I liked both of the characters who were involved in it. I liked how it wasn't they just see each other and immediately fall in love. They get to know one another and learn things about each other and don't even like each other at first. So, yeah, I thought the romance was not my favorite, but I didn't dislike it. So it was good. I liked it. But, yeah, so that was fun. And then one other thing that I enjoyed was the villains in this book are complicated. So from the page 1, you don't know exactly who you trust and who you don't trust. The villains take a while to develop, and that's something that I like in a book, because it's accurate to real life. When you meet someone, you don't know what their true motivations are, what you're going to think about them, and so there's a point where it becomes clear, okay, these are the people that are villains, these are the people that are the good characters, but that point doesn't come for a while. There's some complications to it. And I always think that's a really interesting point in the novel. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the characters and the relationships in this novel. So the last thing I want to do is just some final thoughts and then some books that are similar to this one. So if you read this book and enjoy it, there are some other books that have kind of a similar feeling to them or similar aspects to them that you might want to read if you enjoy this one. And so some of my final thoughts, obviously this is a really amazing read. I've been raving about it the whole video, and I gave it 5 stars, so if you are intrigued by what I've said about it, then you'll definitely want to check it out. I promise you it will be worth it. My age rating for this would probably be 11 and up or so, because there are some fight scenes and some romance scenes, but nothing terribly graphic. I would have been fine reading this when I was 11 or 12. So yeah, that's my age rating for it. And lastly is some books that are similar to this. So, or on the flip side, if you've read one of these books and want to know a little bit more about what this book is like, you might be encouraged to know that it's like one of these books. So the first up is The Thief by Megan Wan Turner. And this is the first book in the Queen's Thief series, which is an incredible series, which I would definitely encourage you to read if you haven't already. And there's some similarities in this to the excellent world building that's kind of like reminiscent of Greek mythology in a way, and the really deep characters, which I feel like the characters are more fleshed out in this book series because it's a 6-book series, so you have a lot of time to get to know the characters, but the characters are also excellent in this book. Next we have The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, which is the first book in the Books of Iron series. And one thing that I thought was similar between these two books is the unique magic system in each of these worlds. And like magic systems are something that there's so much variation to that when you're creating a world you can do so many different things with. And both of these books have very unique systems involving that. So The Goose Girl, the Books of Iron series, definitely a worthwhile read. You should check it out if you like this book, read it and like it, or just think it would be something you would like. And then lastly we have probably the most popular book on this list, which is The False Prince by Jennifer Ann Newsom. And this is the first book in yet another series, and nothing in particular is really similar about these. They're both fantasy, both take place in a similar world, and except for they just have like the same feeling to it. Like there's an underlying mystery in The False Prince, along with one of the best plot twists in the existence of books, and there's just a similar feeling to them. I got like a False Prince feeling while I was reading it. So if you liked any of those 3 books, or check this book out and like it, you might want to read the other one. So those are my final thoughts. And the last thing I'm going to do is just share really quickly some of my favorite quotes from this book. So that is it for my book review on this book, and if it sounds like something you might like, I really hope that you will check it out because it really is an amazing read and I enjoyed every second of it. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and if you've read this book or are planning to read it, let me know down in the comments. And to close us out, I have our bookish quote of the day. Reading gives us some place to go when we have to stay where we are. Mason Cooley.